it's a sand prairie with a great amount of diversity in terms of vegetation, because sand prairies, first of all, are not very common in the state. Most of Iowa's prairie was black soil prairie, basically the rich fertile soil that became corn and soybean fields. Sand prairies are primarily located in the eastern third of Iowa, along river valleys where sand was blown out of the river valleys historically and formed sand dunes, basically sand drifts, usually on the eastern side of those streams. And so they're limited in their abundance, but there's many examples, of course, in the eastern third of the state. This is the biggest one. This is the biggest and most impressive one in terms of its size and the depth of the sand. And it has, like all sand prairies, and it has a lot of plant species that again are unusual for Iowa, because they have to be very tolerant of hot, dry conditions. Sand does not hold moisture well, of course, and so they have to be able to tolerate that. They have to be able to tolerate the low amount of nutrients, so kind of a low fertility type of environment too. And many of the prairie species are able to do that because they sort of naturally face that condition after the glaciers receded, and eventually after succession from ice to some sort of probably herbaceous layer that was adapted to the gravelly conditions of the post-glaciation. Those are some of the same species, of course, that can do well here, because the conditions are pretty much the same. The glaciers left a lot of sand and gravel and sterile soil. We can't even really call it soil. A number of the species, animal and plants, are probably sort of relic types of species here, because they're more typically found, to the west of us or the southwest of us. And most likely what happened from about 9,000, 8,000 years ago to about 4,000 years ago, we were at the peak warming period of the interglacial period we're in now. And that period of about 4,000 years, from 8,000 to 4,000 years ago, was the peak warming period. And we call that the hypsothermal period. And since 4,000 years ago, we've been getting cooler and moister. Now, everything sort of changes at the end of that with global warming now, and so we're kind of, we're not sure where we're going exactly now, but that was the trend for a long, last 4,000 years. But during that hypsothermal period, most likely there was a vast amount of migration of western species into this area, because it was much warmer and drier, and the tallgrass prairie, which we consider the normal prairie for Iowa, was able to advance way into the east, into Pennsylvania, and even maybe parts further east. And so it was just a big shift. Tallgrass prairie shifting to the east, and midgrass and shortgrass prairie, the drier prairie that's now out west of us, all shifting to the east. And so Iowa probably in general had much more of a kind of a Great Plains or a southwestern kind of look to it that brought these species here. And then when things started getting cooler 4,000 years ago, and the tallgrass prairie kind of shifted back, and the trees kind of reclaimed some of the areas to the east of us, the drier shortgrass and midgrass prairies, they shifted back to the west too. It was just a matter of plant migrations and shifting there. During that shifting back to the way it was before the hypsothermal period, things again getting cooler, many of these species weren't able to persist on our landscape because they were overtaken by tallgrass prairie species, because the climate favored them now. But in places like this, and I could also add the Luss Hills, we have microclimates, special conditions that, despite being in a tallgrass prairie climate now, we have microclimate conditions that provide sort of a refugia or a relict kind of landscape here, in a sense, that allow these western species that came here during that period, their descendants, their populations, individuals, to now persist here. They haven't been driven away yet, because the microclimate environments here are just like further out west. That's kind of a neat way of thinking about how this all came here and why it's still here.